Hey guys, what is up? I apologize for my long absence. My PC died, and I've been playing some Borderlands 3, so I haven't been playing much Souls lately, and haven't been that interested in making videos, but I thought now would be a pretty opportune time to make one. I want to talk about first an article entitled Playing to Win. You may have seen other content creators reference this. It's a book, and actually the entire book is available for free online, and it actually includes an overview, which I think is really cool, and I recommend everyone go and read at least the overview because it'll give you an idea of whether you'd find the entire book interesting, and I think it's really thought-provoking, and I just really recommend it. And I think a lot of the attitudes a lot of the players in Dark Souls 3 have are at least indirectly informed by that article, or at least the ideas it embodies. And I think there's a couple things that the author talks about, and I think really his thesis is if you are playing to win, then you should do essentially whatever it takes to win within the rules of the game. And this includes doing things like glitches. But without getting into glitches just yet, he talks about players that don't have this playing to win attitude, and he refers to them as scrubs, and he emphasizes that he doesn't mean it as an insult. It's just that's the word that accurately describes what players like that do and think, and they place artificial constraints upon themselves where they won't use certain things if they think it's cheap or if it's OP. And by and large, I agree with what the author is saying. However, a very important caveat to all of this is that this entire argument, or this way of thinking, presumes a very important fact, and that is that the game that you are playing is well balanced. And the author talks a little bit about this, but I think too quickly kind of brushes it aside, because I think if you talk to somebody, at least most people that we would think maybe could fit in that category of scrub, that is precisely their complaint. Their complaint is that something is too cheap, or that it's too powerful, or that it's too easy, or that it's imbalanced. And so I think that's really the source of the argument, is not whether people should stay away from certain moves or not just because, it's whether they should stay away from those moves because they're not balanced for the game. So the question comes, if I'm unwilling to use a glitch in a game, does that make me a scrub? And I think the answer is it really depends on the nature of the glitch, because some glitches are somewhat balanced and some are not. And I won't ever blame somebody that uses glitches in a game. I think if they're in the game, you can make the argument that you should be able to use them. And again, games should be well balanced for the most part. And so glitches that aren't well balanced aren't going to be in a game for very long. Under normal circumstances, that's certainly true. Unfortunately for us, Dark Souls 3, we're not in normal circumstances. This is a game that really, especially in the meta invasion game at Pontiff, is really not well balanced to begin with. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, with some of the recent glitches that have been discovered, or at least that have been popularized, the game is even worse or less balanced than ever before. So let's talk about glitches, and rather than focusing sort of exclusively on some of the more recent glitches, and not even necessarily focusing just on Dark Souls, I just want to talk about glitches more broadly, what they bring to a game, what their effects are, and how we should think about them, and how we should react if we find ourselves in a position where we learn some on our own. I think there is an attitude, and I think it comes from the Playing to Win article, or at least people that have been influenced by it, which is, again, you should use any glitches that are available and any that are at your disposal. And I think in a lot of games that's probably true. I'm not so sure whether it's true in Dark Souls 3, but let's assume for a moment it is. The fact that you should use whatever glitches are at your disposal tells us absolutely nothing about the general desirability of glitches in games, and it certainly doesn't tell us anything at all about whether, if we happen to discover a glitch, whether we ought to publicize that glitch or not. I've encountered this really weird attitude where, again, if it's one thing to defend the use of glitches in your own gameplay, but it's quite another to defend the idea that anybody that discovers a glitch ought to popularize that glitch, and further, that any glitch in any game is necessarily positive for the game, a positive development. And frankly, I cannot see this being possibly true. I mean, if you sit and just stop and think about it for a moment, any game that's good has a number of properties that make it good. It rewards skill. It's fun to play. Well, why is it fun to play? It's that rewarding of skill. Things are balanced. Usually, if your opponent is trying a tactic there's some sort of tactic that will counter it. I mean, this is the essence of fighting games, the rock, paper, scissors nature of them. There is no single dominant strategy. In a well-balanced game, there will always be things that counter whatever strategy your opponent is using. I mean, think about it. Ask yourself this question. If you took a good game, and it could be Dark Souls or it could be any other game, if you took a good game and just started making random changes to the game, making random changes to the amount of damage a weapon does, or its moveset, or some aspect of the player or the environment, and you're making random changes, what are the percentage chances that those changes are actually good for the game? I submit that in a good game, the odds are very, very low. Almost any random change that gets made to a game is going to make it worse, not better. That's why developers spend so much time and effort tweaking these games and making them as good as they can. If you could just make random changes to games and have the game be better as a consequence, then game development would become very trivial. You just start off with the foundation of a game and then just start making random changes to it, content in the knowledge that you'd be adding a ton of depth for everybody to play with. Now, we shouldn't conclude that the opposite is true, that any glitch is necessarily bad for the game, but it should probably be our default stance. If we don't know anything about a glitch, it's essentially a random change to the gameplay, and a random change to the gameplay is likely to make things worse. Now, not always. It can sometimes make it better, or it can at least make it better for some sorts of players, but I think going into the scope of for which players it would be good for and talking about that, that's probably too much for this video. But I think our default stance on any glitch is probably, until proven otherwise, it's probably not a good thing for the game. And let's take the FAP ring glitch as an example. Dealing with the FAP ring glitch can be very, very frustrating, and the reason it's frustrating is because it has no counter. It essentially gives the user infinite stamina and lets them run away infinitely. They can run away and wait for a backup or wait for you to get frustrated and bored, but that's why it's annoying. It has no counter. And a game that's well designed ultimately has counters to everything. That's part of where the fun comes in. You're trying to read what your opponent's doing and you're trying to come up with a strategy that counters it. But with a glitch like that, there is no counter. And stamina management is fundamental to the nature of this game. It's only second probably to health management. If you had something that gave you infinite health, that would obviously be game destroying. And interestingly enough, when I had this discussion informally with some people that were defending the release of some of the recent glitches, I asked them the question. I said, what if you found a glitch that gave you infinite health? Would you disclose that? Would you think that's good for the game? And believe it or not, I actually had people say yes, that would be good for the game. It would be good to get it out in the community and see what people could do with it. Well, I don't need to get that in the community to know what people will do with it. It would essentially be the end of the game. There would be no point to fighting if you couldn't beat the other player if they had infinite health. Now, infinite stamina obviously isn't that bad, but it's a close second. It is just one of the most frustrating things to deal with. And in fact, I have said for a long time, that would be number one on my list of things to fix. If From Software, at least up until a couple of weeks ago, could have changed one thing in this game, it would have been to get rid of the FAP ring glitch. I guess at the end of the day, to me, it's just clear that any kind of game has to have some semblance of balance. You think about the weapon distribution in Dark Souls 3, there's certain weapons like Ultra Greatswords that do a lot of damage when they hit your opponent. But as a trade-off, they're a lot slower. The really fast weapons tend to do a lot less damage. Now, are these weapons perfectly balanced against each other? No, I do not think they are. And I think as evidence of that, you only have to look to see the idea of the offhand meta with a really fast offhand weapon that's difficult to reaction roll and is good at roll catching and punishing miss rolls from your opponent. And in fact, I think From really missed an opportunity to, at least in the early days, take a more active look at some of the telemetry data and make changes to the game and make changes to the weapons. And I think had they done that, this game could have been even richer as a consequence. It would have made nearly every weapon in the game completely viable. They could have even taken things like within the same class of weapons, like say curved swords, made certain curved swords a little bit slower, make them do more damage, change the move sets around. The opportunities really were pretty limitless. But this idea of balance has to be there, and I think a lot of these glitches even if you can, quote, play around them, they still make the game imbalanced. And just because a really skilled player can still outplay another player that's using a glitch, that doesn't make it any more balanced than it would have been otherwise. Now, there is one aspect of this that kind of saves us, one aspect of these glitches, and that is the symmetrical nature of PvP in Dark Souls, meaning whatever your opponent can do, you can do it too. So if you're confronted with an opponent that's using a glitch that's making your life very difficult, well, you can use the same glitch, and that sort of evens the playing field. And I think that certainly keeps a lot of glitches from being too disastrous for the game. But think about what that really means. Think about the kinds of weapons that people use in what you might call competitive Dark Souls. There aren't very many weapons at all that people use. It's because the weapons aren't well balanced. And because it's not well balanced, that forces everyone in to using just one of a handful of weapons, because those are the only ones that can reasonably contest. When people are very closely matched in skill, the matchup matters way more than it would normally. And that's why so few weapons are actually viable. So if there's a glitch that makes one particular kind of build really powerful, well, then that forces everyone to have to use the same exact build. I mean, people complain about a lack of build diversity today. With a glitch like some of the ones that have come out recently, and I'm purposely being vague, though I'm sure at this point everybody knows the ones that I mean, there's really only one build that becomes viable when you're fighting against these. Maybe two. I think G9 did an interesting video. He talked about some potential counters. And I guess I would just ask that if you're somebody that happens to find a glitch, think about it before you make a video. That's not to say that you shouldn't make the video. I myself have made videos about glitches in this game, and I'm happy to discuss and defend the release of that in the comments. I don't want to get into in the video here, but just think about it. Guys, thanks for watching. Take care now.